The last section in Chapter 6 deals with the chi-square distributions, and for that there is no shortcut method. You're actually going to do this one on your calculator. And so I just want to go through a couple examples so you can find the values that you need to input into your formulas. So in your formula sheets that you printed out under course content, you'll find that you have Table 6, which is a chi-square distribution chart. When you are dealing with, let's say, a 90% confidence interval, and we're going to have 8 of them in our study, 8 subjects, I'm going to go over here to the 90%, so just so you have a visual. If you have 90% in the middle, that means the remaining 10% has to be split between those two ends. So that would leave me 5% on this side and 5% on this side. When I am looking at this chart, it's totally opposite of the normal chart. Instead of these being read to the left, they're actually areas to the right. So if I'm looking at this cutoff, the 5% or 0.05, what I'm looking at instead is that it's 95% total to the right of it. So I'm looking for the area to the right of that point. So 95% to the right, I'd be looking in this column. And on this cutoff, on the right-hand side, it's 5% to the right. So it would be over here in this column. If I have n equals 8, I'm actually going to go down and use for my degrees of freedom 7. N minus 1 is our degrees of freedom. So I would have for chi-square left 2.167 and for chi-square right 14.067. Next example, I have n is 10 and a 95% confidence interval. With a 95% in here, that leaves me 5% split amongst the two wings. So I'm just going to do a quick little chart here, and I can't draw worth a darn, sorry about that. I'm going to put my 0.95 or 95%. That's going to leave me 0.025 in each of the ends. So if I'm on the left-hand side, I would add these two together for a total of 97.5% or 0.975 for my left cutoff. The right cutoff is going to be 0.025, so it would be in this column. If I have 10 in my study, I'm going to have 9 degrees of freedom. So my left and my right cutoffs are in these two columns along the row with the 9 degrees of freedom. So my left would be 2.7 and my right would be 19.023. The other thing that you can do to make it a little bit easier is if you find your right in this column, it's 1, 2, 3 columns in. This one has to be 3 columns in. 1, 2, 3. And so you can use that method also. For 6 and 80%, that means we have 20% split between the wings, and so 10% on each side. So that would leave me a 0.9 and a 0.1. So for n is 6, I'd have 5 degrees of freedom, and I would have 1.61 and 9.236. When you're putting these into the formulas, note that your chi-square right actually goes on this side, and your chi-square left goes on this side. So putting these into the formula just like this, you'll have a confidence interval based on the variance. Since the standard deviation is just the square root of the variance, all you have to do is take the square root of that first answer for the standard deviation. My advice to you is once you have calculated this number, I would go ahead and take the square root of it right away so that you aren't rounding a lot for your standard deviation. And then just write that number down so you have it for later. That way you don't have to re-put it into your calculator and make a rounding error.